Thank you. My name is Barbara Yates, and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all here to our fourth Small Talk speaker series. Through Small Talks, we're inviting key leaders and community partners to participate in important conversations along with our own staff experts in the field. Over the course of this series, we've explored strategies to close the word gap in Minnesota, introduced how Think Small parent-powered text can help get children ready for kindergarten by turning everyday family activities into learning opportunities, and looked at social-emotional strategies for changing adult behaviors to confront the alarming expulsion rates in early childhood. Now, our guests today include those in the early learning field who are currently tackling the issues of building and sustaining a child care workforce. But before we start, I want to give a few words of thanks. In particular, I want to thank our sponsor for today, Legacy Financial Advisors. Tom Menzel is here representing Legacy Financial Advisors. They made this possible for today. So can we get I also want to thank the Wilder Foundation for accommodating us at this beautiful location this morning. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Kelly Monson. Kelly serves as the Executive Director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet, which is housed within the Governor's Office. The Minnesota Children's Cabinet strives to partner with families, communities, and government agencies to eliminate structural racism and inequities that exist in access, policies, programs, and practices. We are happy to have Kelly with us here this morning. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for joining us today. Today's topic is elevating the early childhood profession, identifying solutions for a better future. And we're going to dive right in this morning because we don't have a ton of time. But I'm going to first introduce our panelists, and then they will each give an overview of their committees. I will ask some prepared questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. We'll start with Kat. Kat Kemp is the Senior Director for Professional Recognition and Advancement with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, a professional membership organization that works to promote high-quality early learning for all young children. Here she leads Power to the Profession, a national collaboration to define the early childhood profession by establishing a unifying framework for career pathways, standards, and compensation. Welcome, Kat. Scott Parker. It's so great to have her back in Minnesota. Scott Parker is a supervisor in the Child Development Services Unit at the Minnesota Department of Human Services and serves on the Minnesota Workforce Compensation Advisory Group. Welcome, Scott. Debbie Hewitt is a supervisor in early learning services at the Minnesota Department of Education and serves as a team leader of the B8 Workforce Core Team, tasked with drafting Minnesota's implementation plan for transforming the workforce. Debbie is also the Red Leaf Press author of So This Is Normal Too and co-author of Play, The Pathway from Theory to Practice. Welcome, Debbie. Diane Halsey is the Senior Vice President of Family Engagement at Think Small and serves as co-chair of the Voices and Choices Coalition for Children, which focuses on shaping more equitable practices and policies that will support better outcomes for children of color and American Indian children. Thank you all for being here today. And Kat, we're going to jump right in and start with you.
Well, good morning. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you to Barb and Zisa and Diane for inviting me to be here and helping to support this conversation. And it's really nice to see so many friendly faces here. So I'm going to talk about the initiative Power to the Profession, which is a joint collaboration that is held by these 15 member organizations, and I'll talk briefly about that as well. But first and foremost, to note that Power to the Profession, that our goal really does tie to what is best for children and families. That supporting the workforce is a social and racial and economic justice issue for the workforce itself, and it is the means for best supporting young children and their families. Power to the Profession has a broad strategy that is a three-pronged approach. first and foremost is really starting with this middle prong of defining and growing the profession. This is what we have shorthand been calling Power to the Profession, and it is a 2-year initiative to come to a sense of what's the shared framework and structure for an early childhood education profession. We also know that public investment and having a policy and advocacy strategy is essential for then implementing this profession. And so the prong on the left is the investing in the profession, having a policy and financing agenda, which we are starting to lay the groundwork now by looking at what's going on in states, having a state scan so we know where we're building from. But we also know that if this is going to be part of a public movement, if we're going to be attracting people to join this profession, if we're going to be enticing families and voters to support this profession, we also need to build the image of the profession. So a public service campaign is also a part of the strategy, and thinking about how can we be building and supporting awareness of the image of the profession. So as I said, we're working in this middle prong of defining and growing the profession. That the goals are to build out a shared definition that includes career pathways, competencies, compensation structures, accountability, and supports for supporting a profession. And what is key is being able to make sure that we are supporting the current workforce and balancing the current workforce while we are advancing this profession. And that these would come together into a policy and financing strategy. The process for building and growing the profession is a 2-year process that began in December of last year, January 2017, and will continue until December of this year. So from January 2017 till December of 2018 is the process for reaching that first goal of a shared definition. The structure and how we talk about power to the profession is first and foremost that the field, that early childhood educators are front and center, that this is power to the profession, to build the profession, to get input and feedback and buy-in and expertise and support. It is truly a collective leadership with the field being front and center. We also have a group of national stakeholders, which I will also talk a little bit about in the prepared questions, but the National Governors Association, the National Academy of Sciences, who have supported some of these other workforce initiatives, are just 2 examples of the stakeholders that are supporting and working alongside and building this work. And then the National Task Force, 15 member organizations that were selected because they represent large numbers of early childhood educators, and also includes those who prepare early childhood educators. So we also have higher education faculty associations as part of this task force. And these 15 member organizations are committed to meeting through this 2-year process. They meet quarterly. They have now had 5 of 8 meetings. And really demonstrating that as we are thinking about building a profession, we're thinking about how can we be supporting educators who work with children birth through age 8 and across all settings. And just one last piece is, this truly is an effort to be able to bring in a movement in support of this profession. So have lots of opportunities for engagement, but that it's all of us working together to build and support early childhood educators.
Thanks, Kat. We'll go on to Scott.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. I want to build a little bit upon what Kat was talking about, in that one of the keys to building and growing and recognizing this profession is around compensation. And you all have I don't have slides, but you all have a report that I'm going to talk about here that we started with a work group funded by a grant from the National Governors Association to really take a look at compensation issues in Minnesota. And knowing that at this point in time, the median wage for folks working in the early childhood field is still $10.80 an hour, that this is an area that we've been struggling with for as many years as I've been in the field and longer than that. When we hear stories from people who work in the field, center directors who say, we bring people in, we train them, and then we know they're going to leave because we can't pay them. This tells us that this is a key area that we need to address and try to improve upon. And so there was a work group that met for a couple of years starting at the end of 2016. And it involved players that have been in the early childhood field, but also folks who maybe haven't been a part of this discussion as much. And that was really our goal, is to try to bring in some new voices and look at new approaches. So we had staff from the Department of Education and the Department of Human Services, but we also had people from the Department of Employment and Economic Development, the Office of Higher Ed, the Department of Labor and Industry, the Department of Human Rights, our state college and university system, members of the Children's Cabinet, as well as our local community partners, folks from Think Small, First Children's Finance, private foundations, the West Central Initiative. So we really try to bring in a broad base of people to look at this from maybe different approaches than we've looked at it before. And really had 5 key strategies that we were focusing on. Strategies to reward base pay for the folks who are working in the field. How can we be rewarding quality at the program level? How can we reward for education at the individual level for folks who work in the field? How do we bring more resources into programs? Because we know programs would like to pay people more, but they can only have the resources that they have. So how can we be bringing more to their bottom line so they can look at addressing issues of compensation? And then how can we provide more resources to individuals beyond base pay? And so we looked at multiple approaches. They're in the report. I'm just going to touch on them very briefly. One of them is an area of tax credits, and we talked to a couple different states, Louisiana and Nebraska, hearing what they've done around tax credits both for families that are choosing childcare, for people who work directly in the field, tax credits for programs, say those that are participating in a quality rating and improvement system, tax credits for businesses that support early childhood, and tax credits for, in Louisiana case, the Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, so they can use it as a fundraising strategy. And so we're really interested in this as a possible approach. One of the things that we said in our report is that any sort of tax credit proposal should tie compensation to quality, tie the tax credit to compensation for staff, make sure we can measure the impact of any sort of tax credits. How do we recognize and address issues related to equity? And how do we use refundable tax credits for people at the individual level? Other approaches are trying to invest in training and education. Right now we have programs for TEACH, for example, for folks who want to go on and get their higher education. We need to continue to support that. Retain, which is a wage enhancement program recognizing people who have gone further up in their education, who have been in the field for a long time. We also looked at other wage retention programs in other states and trying to figure out if we could improve upon our own models. Loan forgiveness is another option that we looked at as possibly helping people who have gotten student loans but are struggling to pay them off. Business education, so not only bringing more money into programs but helping them use it wisely. Again, other ways to tie compensation to state funding and quality initiatives, bringing in the private sector more, and really talking about career pathways. Because when people are in this field, they think of it as working in the classroom, maybe being a director in a program, but they don't see the other opportunities that might be there, whether that's to be a trainer or to be a mentor or a coach, to work in the nonprofit sector that supports this field, to work in state government. There's a lot of different ways that we can grow the profession and talk to people about the opportunities that they have. And so you'll see there are recommendations on page 12 of this report. The report was sent to the governor's office, really looking at the different approaches that we talked about. It will be up on the Children's Cabinet website if you want to look at it there as well, and we'll talk more about it.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Debbie Hewitt from the Department of Education, and I'm here to talk about the work that the V8 Workforce Core Team has been doing to draft a plan to look at some of the 13 recommendations found in the Transforming the Workforce report. That report is 700 pages long, and we were brought together to create an implementation plan based on 3 of the recommendations, and we couldn't do that. We knew that things were so interwoven and so dependent on each other that we really needed to try to narrow it down, and we arrived at 5 of the recommendations that we are making some suggestions for implementation at this point. The goal is to create a 10-year implementation plan. We know that it's not easy, it's not going to be fast. We know that we need everybody's work to come together and head the same direction on this, and it is such important work that we're looking forward to everyone's involvement. Whoa. So of the 5 areas that we looked at, Minnesota took the national recommendation and created a Minnesota vision. And this first vision is that we will have a unified system of early childhood education. And the work that needs to be done is to enhance and support the institutes of higher ed and our professional development system who prepare and educate our teacher candidates and providers. So some of the things that need to take place underneath that vision is we need to have institutes of higher ed continue to operate their early childhood programs. We know that some programs have had to close, unfortunately, and we need to have people understand the importance of those and keep them in operation. We need to make sure that our teacher candidates are well prepared because the classes have meaningful preparation that is important to the work that they'll be doing upon graduation. We need to retain and recruit diverse faculty members, and we need to provide them with support so that those faculty members can get out into the communities as often as possible to, first of all, look at field placements of high quality so that teacher candidates and providers can have exemplar programs to be mentored in and to learn from. So we need to increase the number of high quality field placements. We need to provide support and education to those cooperating teachers, and we need to look at opportunities for hubs where the exemplar programs might be housed. We also need to create clear pathways for people who might join the profession at multiple times in a lifetime, and so some people might join the profession as they begin their education, go from high school into college. Some people start their preparation in high school, some midlife, and we need to find ways for them to advance their education and their career at whatever point they choose to enter. The national report calls for a BA, and for all people who are in a lead role to have a BA as they work with young children. Minnesota's team decided we have pre-work that needs to be done. We aren't there yet. We need to find ways that our educational system and professional development system has this unified goal and offers these pathways, as well as make it easier for people to access, to continue their education, that the supports that are offered are what they need, and that it's available throughout the state, which includes broadband access and programs around Minnesota. The next priority that we decided to focus on is that we collect and use data to make decisions, and we collect all kinds of data. But it doesn't necessarily the systems don't talk to each other, and it isn't necessarily easy to make sense because sometimes we're trying to compare apples and oranges. And so we need to improve that data collection system. And finally, we need to find a place, a home for all this really important work. If somebody, some entity, some people don't have actual responsibility for it, it's kind of like, come on over for coffee, and that date never really happens. So we need to find a place for the work.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here today representing Voices and Choices for Children's Coalition to talk about the workforce. As we've been pretty involved, especially with the VA workforce that's just been talked about. For many children of color in Minnesota, their preschool experience is the only time that they're able to see a provider or teacher that looks like them. Because as they move into the K-12 system, oftentimes that environment is not very diverse. And so Voices and Choices has been very adamant that as we work to professionalize this field, that we don't do it in such a way that pushes providers of color or English language providers out of the field. For instance, by requiring or making something mandatory, such as a degree, that without sufficient supports, that many providers, including providers of color, would not be able to obtain. Therefore, we are very supportive of policies that create a well-resourced pathway to receive any type of additional education and training, a pathway that's designed to offer post-secondary models for educating non-traditional learners, for instance. We also support any opportunities for providers to increase their education, their degrees. We love that idea. It's also good to note that these non-traditional supports also would offer support to other non-traditional learners, such as those learners that are not computer literate. And there may be many providers, especially older providers, that are in the field right now that are not computer literate, or that have transportation issues or other issues that make it a little bit more difficult for them to obtain education or a degree. So we're here just more as a reminder to make sure that we make sure that as we do this work that we keep these things in mind. And not only do we want to retain those providers of color in the field, we want to be able to grow them as well. We want to make sure that we're growing as many providers of color as we can. For many families of color or families that have additional language or cultural issues, we're often put in a position of having to choose between having a provider that is culturally sensitive, that speaks your language, that reflects your culture, or something that is high quality. And we should never be put in that situation. Families of color should always be able to find a provider that reflects their culture, their language, as well as being very high quality as well. So we're very supportive of increasing education and quality and getting as many providers of color into the field.
Thank you everyone for that overview. We're gonna dive right in, and I have a question actually to all of you. Like it's been stated that this is not necessarily something new, it's something we've been dealing with for a long time. And do you feel that now is a time where real change is a possibility?
I want to start by thanking people. I want to thank the people who I know some of you are in the audience today for the work that has been done prior to this that we are building on. And if that work hadn't taken place, this work couldn't. And so those efforts need to be acknowledged. And then I do want to say that I do think that we are reaching a tipping point. I think that there is national momentum being built, state momentum being built, and there are other initiatives that aren't represented here on the panel that are taking place that are helping with this as well. Just a couple that I'd mention, and I know that I'm going to miss some, but there's financing quality teaching with Berkeley that's taking place right now, and the transfer pathways work that has been so important at Minnesota State colleges and universities. So those are a couple additional things that I think are helping fill the bucket.
I'll just use this one. So I think one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot more support at the legislative level, both state and federal, for these issues. You know, I think back to the reauthorization of the Child Care Development Block Grant in 2014, which Hadn't been done in almost 20 years, and it passed with wide bipartisan support. Just last week, we saw major increases in funding for the Child Care Development Fund, another almost $2.4 billion for this fiscal year, and that had bipartisan support. At the state level, we're seeing interest at the legislative level supporting access for early childhood. A lot of different ideas of how to get there, but ideas on both sides of the aisle. Interest in the governor's office. So I really feel like there is momentum, not just at the community level, but at the higher levels of government where actually there's funding that's coming in to support that as well.
I want to really underscore what Scott was saying about the legislative support, that really is the result of your work. It's building on 40 years of advocacy efforts that we were able to make this transition. And another piece that makes this context different is the research that we have, both of course the economic research as well as the neuroscience, to really be able to have a different set of arguments about why this is the time and why these are the issues that we need to be paying attention to.
Diane, do you want to answer that one? Okay, so Kat, from a national perspective, how do all these task groups align and how do they differ?
Yes. So as I mentioned, these groups, we are in a coordination and collaboration and have regular conversations at the national level. I use the analogy that we're touching different parts of the elephant, that we each have a slightly different perspective, but we're building on the same advocacy foundation that we've been building toward. The Transferring the Workforce report from the National Academy in 2015 is our source document that really opened up this new conversation, or this next chapter of the conversation. And learning from each other, learning from how can we be leveraging the National Governors Association and the power that a governor's office has to draw in higher education, Indeed, and all those other groups that haven't been traditionally around the early childhood table, as well as with the National Academies and thinking through how to make those 13 recommendations become real. For Power to the Profession, it is the collective leadership of building the profession. And what is slightly different about Power to the Profession is we've done a lot of research looking at other professions, nursing and accounting and speech pathology and architecture. And it's about the individual's preparation that then prepares them to be able to do the work, which is different than how things have been currently set, where funding streams determine what the requirements are. So that's one of the things that all being at the table and coming to agreement, while also bringing the workforce along to having this understanding about doing the same work for sharing and supporting young children.
Thanks, Kat. So Scott, how does your work at DHS relate directly to the workforce?
Well, we have multiple approaches to supporting the workforce. In our unit, we administer our funding, which is about $20 million a year, mostly through grant contracts and professional technical contracts, and much of that is designated to support the workforce. And I'll just build upon one of the things that Diane had mentioned in her comments, was around having a well-resourced pathway for folks to continue to pursue education and professional development. And for us, that's one of our key goals. We start at the foundational level with training, whether you need that to become licensed, maintain your licensure, continuing education, and building upon that all the way through credentials. We design and develop curriculum that will help people attain a Child Development Associate credential, for example. We have supports for TEACH, which will help people go back to college and pursue higher education. We do grants and scholarships. We also have Retain, which is our workforce retention program. We do coaching, so we have coaching that happens at all sorts of levels, both within Parent Aware, our quality rating and improvement system, as well as health and safety consultation that happens directly with programs, coaching on best practices for caring for infants and toddlers. We do business education. We also have professional development advisors, so when we really talk about those career pathways, we want to be talking with people about, where do you want to go in this field? What type of education do you need? Where can you find that? And we have resources both within our Child Care Aware system that can do that, as well as our Minnesota Center for Professional Development, which has a virtual career guidance tool, so folks can go online and look at the different types of careers that might be available and get the information about what type of education might I need, where can I find that, how can I afford that. And so These are all things we've been doing over time. We've been building upon that. I will just mention that right now, the state of Minnesota and DHS is leading this work to develop our next 3-year federal plan to use our Child Care and Development Fund. I mentioned just a little while ago, we're going to see hopefully some increases in that funding that comes from the latest budget agreement. And we want people's feedback on how we move forward with those dollars over the next 3 years. So we are having public hearings at the end of April, both on April 23rd and April 25th. We can get that information to Think Small so they can share that with all of you that were here today. But we really do want to keep building upon this work, and we want to hear from all of you about ways we can continue to do it better.
Thanks, Scott. So Debbie, we know with any sort of initiative, there's lots of successes and challenges, although I like to call them opportunities. But what have been some of those faced with the NGA work or the B8 workforce work?
The B8 workforce work right now, it's a draft plan. We are currently trying to obtain stakeholder input through an online survey. And that's great. We all want you to go take the survey and give us your ideas about what we should keep doing, what we should stop doing, what we should start doing on these 5 recommendations that we've identified. And we know that online surveys are not the only way, or sometimes even the best way, to get stakeholder feedback. So both DHS and MDE have offered a small amount of financial support to do some focus groups, but we need to do more of that, and we need more funding so that we can do that. We want to reach diverse communities and rural communities and get some additional ideas. So that's one of the challenges that we have. We also need administrators of institutes of higher ed to see the value and the work that we are suggesting and to be a part of the solution to enhance and support institutes of higher ed. We need to work with PELSB, let's see if I can get this right, Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, the new board of teaching, and their counterparts and their partners to work together to ensure that these pathways are doable, that they're reasonable, and that everybody feels like they can be a part of a pathway. And we need to make sure that these reports don't just sit on the shelf. Everybody has an opportunity and a responsibility to be part of that solution. I think some of the successes that are taking place right now, we have had in Minnesota the opportunity to be part of these national initiatives, and so many states aren't in a position yet to be part of those. I think that that's just been amazing. I think that the work that has been done has been unique in how cross-sector, cross-program, we have had everybody thinking about all program types, and that's really important. Because everybody's looking for high-quality, well-skilled teachers, and finding those to be challenges. I also think that more people are talking about this in different ways than ever before. And the fact that people are looking at this as something that will support the economic development and help their community thrive is a new way to talk about it. And that's important to everybody. And so I think that's great. And I think that the governor's office adding staff focused on workforce is awesome.
So Diane, you talked about this a little bit in your opening, but when looking at Minnesota's opportunity gap, what methods can we implement now when trying to professionalize the field of early childhood while at the same time increase wages?
So thank you for that question. You know, I want to start by just acknowledging the fact that we are tasking the early childhood field with a huge task of closing that opportunity gap that starts very young, wanting our children to show up ready to learn, all of our children to show up ready to learn in kindergarten. And that is really a huge task. And because a lot happens in those early years, especially for children of color. A lot happens that we don't always realize. There's a lot of implicit bias that happens in our classrooms that tears away at the ego strength of a very young child. And so there's several things that probably need to happen. One of those is we need to address the implicit bias that happens in our classrooms. We live in Minnesota where we don't like to talk about things that make us uncomfortable. And because we don't like to talk about the racism or sexism or classism that may happen, it's created one of the most divisive opportunity gaps in the country. And so somehow we're going to have to deal with that. Somehow we're going to have to get at that issue. That's because what's happening is because of that, our children are going into to their programs, to school, and they're being told in a very told in a way that's not straight out, in the way that you may talk or treat or respond. The message that they're receiving is that they're not good enough and that I cannot learn and that no, you don't believe that I can learn. That's the message that they're receiving, which results in the opportunity and achievement gap that we see. And so we need to, and we've been talking about, how to do this, how to educate our field, how to train our field to be able to look at it and deal with their own implicit bias. As they're working with, as teachers are working with their families, as they're working with their children. So that's one thing. We have to find a way to really get at that issue. The other thing is we need to also be able to empower parents and families with being able to access providers and programs that do reflect their culture, do reflect their language. And so being able to give a family, for instance, an uncapped scholarship so that they can go and wherever they want to go to a program that's high quality, but is also reflective of their culture. I know myself personally was in this position when my children were little. I had to make the decision of whether or not I'm going to go to a place where I know my children are going to be, their ego strength is going to be built up, and where they're going to go to some place that knows they can learn and will give them that message every day, all day. And they'll come out knowing that wherever they go from there, that they're going to be able to learn, whether or not to send my child someplace like that or to a place where, maybe is very well acclaimed, but they're going to be ignored. And so I had to make that choice. And many families are in this position every day, having to make that choice. And so somehow we also need to be able to address, and thankfully I was able to make that choice. I didn't have to, I had the wherewithal, to take my child wherever I wanted to take them, but did make the choice to send them somewhere where I knew their ego strength would be built up. All families need to be able to make that choice, regardless of whether or not they have the financial wherewithal. And so we need to be able to create a system that allows them to do that allows all families to be able to choose wherever place supports them, supports their culture, supports their language.
Thank you, Diane, for that answer. So this, I want to move on to audience questions, but I'm going to ask this last question of all of you, and I really think it's like the million-dollar question to ask. But as we move towards professionalizing the field, what measures can we take that our providers of color, our non-native English speakers, and what I like to call our more seasoned providers, how do we not make them feel pushed or pushed out of the field or pushed to get education that maybe they're not interested in? Who wants to tackle that?
I can start. I think these folks will definitely build upon it. I wanted to highlight some of the measures we're currently taking, and I think we need to keep building upon it. We need to make services available to meet the needs of the folks that we're trying to provide those services for. And so one example of that is we've had a grant that started with Think Small. We've now continued to build upon that work. And we've recruited trainers that were bilingual and bicultural. If we're going to ask people to take training and they need to take it to meet certain requirements, we need to be able to provide it in languages that they understand, that's culturally relevant. We need to be able to build upon our system so we can deliver that, not just in the metro area, but statewide. We need to continue to build upon our coaching infrastructure so that we have coaches that can do the same thing. So when we want to try to get programs into systems like Parent Aware or that have access to our health and safety or infant toddler consultation, that we can do it in a language that meets their needs. And so for us, part of what we have started and need to continue to build upon is to have that infrastructure to meet the needs of our diverse provider community.
And if you have to take training, let's make sure that it's meaningful, that it's of high quality, and that it can advance your education and your career, as well as count for those requirements. And so when we talk about pathways, that's part of what we're trying to build. Ways that training and educational opportunities that you are involved in can be as helpful to you in your career and professional advancement as you want them to be.
I will also add the piece about technology because I really believe that one of the areas that we need to support our providers is in the area of technology. We don't want these providers to feel pushed out of the field because there are many providers that are not computer literate or computer savvy, and we really are moving, our world is moving really fast, and it's really hard to navigate now without being able to be computer literate, to be able to get online. And so we need to be able, for those providers that aren't able to do that, we need to be able to provide support and assistance and technical assistance to help them do that.
I think the answer is there is no silver bullet, that it is sort of all these different pieces together, while also thinking about how are we addressing systemic racism in higher education, how are we thinking about infrastructure or the broadband pieces. The other piece that I would add on that I think is really valuable is the storytelling of those who have attained their degrees and what it has mattered to their practice. To be able to have that sort of mentorship of someone who says, yeah, I love kids, but I didn't know what I didn't know, and I got this degree, and it's amazing, and it has transformed the work that I'm able to do. To elevate the stories of educators who are doing that work, to have that sort of mentorship and goal setting for the rest of the field.
Thank you, everyone. Well, let's move over to audience questions. Here's your opportunity to ask our state and national experts around this area.
Kat, I'm really curious, the first prong you showed in your building the profession, what you've learned so far about what public perception outside of this room really is about the field. And I'm particularly interested in 2 points. One, I feel like anecdotally, people of a certain generation may be predisposed to call in-home family care providers babysitters, for example.
Thank you very much.
Then the other piece is how rarely you hear child care providers discussed as small businesses. Those 2 points are particularly interesting, but in general, what have you?
Yeah, I could do a whole hour session on this. So we have begun laying the groundwork on market research with voters. We've done 3 buckets of market research. The third bucket is going to be released at our Professional Learning Institute in Austin, Texas in June. But we did research with those who are getting their degrees and want to come into the field, new early childhood educators, as well as voters in the public more broadly. And this market research showed the public more broadly sees early childhood as a valuable career, that the headline slide is a trusted profession on par with nurses and firefighters. Something that we really see early childhood educators as having an important role to play in society. It was who's paying for early childhood educators that then we started to see some of the breakdown. But overall, that there was a lot of support for that early childhood education is a role, a job, a profession that is really valuable. On nauic.org/profession is all the slides with all the market research data that shows support for the public where we see gaps when it comes to age demographics and political leanings and
Thank you. How about another question? Go ahead, Tessa.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about rural, or things that you might be thinking about in this field that are more prevalent or more concerning for rural providers and rural child care?
is that to anyone?
Certainly the broadband comes up, but are there other pieces of developing that have different nuances in rural areas?
Well, I will start by saying I think a lot of attention is being paid right now to the lack of available child care in rural Minnesota. And we know that that's an issue. And so trying to think through what are the factors related to that. And so I think there's a couple of things that we're aware of and trying to build upon. And one is, when we get to the things that we fund, for example, we want to make sure that we have the services available in rural Minnesota. We don't want providers to have to drive an hour each way to get training, for example. We want to make sure that we have coaching services that can come to a program, that we have the types of services we offer available statewide. But the other thing I'll just mention is that I'm excited about the fact that rural communities in this state are coming together and really thinking about how we can address these issues. We have a grant with First Children's Finance where the purpose of this grant is to build upon work that they do where they bring communities together and they look at individualized solutions based on what the situation is for that community. And that when you talk about momentum about this work and in the field, we're seeing people at those tables that have not taken an interest in this before. Mayors and local government, businesses who are saying we can't get workers because we don't have people that can care for their children. That's right. And exactly. And so this is where this builds upon this momentum as well. And I think that if we can keep an infrastructure going that allows for those conversations and then take what we're learning from those communities and meet their individual needs, that's one way to address this issue.
And the B8 work looking at enhancing and supporting institutes of higher ed, I was at an Access meeting, which is the 2-year Institute of Higher Ed faculty groups on Friday. And they all are concerned about their programs being cut. And as they near retirement, many of them are at that age, they're concerned that their programs won't survive them. And so we already have big areas of the state where access to programming is challenging. And if this trend were to continue where programs are closed, we'll have even greater access issues. So our work to make sure that there is programming available throughout the state is really important. I've recently heard about a new partnership between Minnesota State, Mankato, and Winona, where they're going to be offering additional early childhood programming. And I hear glimmers of hope that Bemidji is going to be opening their program again. But we need to keep working in that area.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Go ahead, sir.
Would you speak to home visits? Because all of our talk is really working with children at this point, sort of out of the home and into the community, whether it's early childhood program or child care. I heard this past week from somebody who just moved to Minnesota that Kansas has a workforce of people that actually have home visits as their job. And knowing that they spend more time at home than anywhere else, and that makes the key difference in how ready they are ultimately for K-12 education. Can you speak to the home visit part of the program and where we are in Minnesota and how that fits into your plans here?
I can talk about a part of that. In transforming the workforce, they use the visual of a tree. And the trunk of the tree is the core education and skills and knowledge that people need who are going to be working with children and their families, regardless of setting. And that we need to get those classes right for all kinds of program types and people who are working with children, whether it's early childhood special education, whether it is home visitors or child care providers or school-based teachers. We need everybody to have that base or foundation of good, solid child development and information, and that's part of the B8 plan.
So when it comes to home visiting is a really important service for supporting parents and supporting families, being able to give their children the home environments that they need. But the type of work that happens in home visiting is so diverse based on what the children and those families need. With Power to the Profession, we talk about home visiting as being a mechanism for delivering early childhood education, but not just sort of saying all home visitors are early childhood educators, because they're not. Different home visiting programs may require different professions to do the outcomes of that home visiting program. So nurse-family partnership may say we need a registered nurse to be able to meet the outcomes of our home visiting program. Early Head Start may say, no, actually we need a licensed early childhood educator to meet the outcomes of our home visiting program. And then a different home visiting program may say, we're really focused on parents and the other pieces about supporting the livelihood of the family, so we need licensed social workers to deliver on the outcomes of our home visiting program. So it's bringing more clarity and being more distinct about what is the goals of those programs and who has the best training and preparation to be able to meet the goals of those home visiting programs.
Thanks, Kat and Debbie. So before I let you off the hook, I want to ask one more question to all of you. So we all play a role in this, and we've talked about this being a tipping point. What can we all do to continue to help move this work forward? Quick answer.
Quick answers. Well, I would say I'll build upon something that Kat mentioned earlier. It doesn't surprise me because I knew her when she was a community organizer. But she talks about being in the community and needing to continue to talk about these issues. And what I've said in other forums like this is, when you're talking about early childhood, it's really important to talk about access and access for families to programs. But we need to be talking about the folks that work in those programs. Because if we don't have people who are qualified, well compensated, working in those programs, we don't have the programs. And so that's just a part of the puzzle that we need to keep talking about.
The B8 plan is going to take collective action of all of us, and I think that if you take the time to look in there, you'll see, oh, this is something I could take responsibility for, and I guess I'd encourage you not to leave it to somebody else.
I would echo the advocacy, but also as a part of, if you are a parent or no parents, to be able to advocate on that behalf, on what you need, what does our communities need, who do we want, raising our children, and what is the system that we need. And so I would just echo to, as parents, to be able to talk and advocate about the system that we need educating our children.
And my closing piece is in your folder. You have a one-page on Power to the Profession that has action steps that you can do to visit the website and sign up. We are in a period of taking public comment on proposals around the structure of the profession. So please visit the website. Please learn more about what is the task force opening up for dialogue and comment on the structure of the profession, and please share your perspectives.
Thank you. Well, before I turn it over to Barb to close, I just want to thank our panelists and thank all of you for being here today. It's a very important topic, and I hope we're ready to push that over to tipping point. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thanks to all of our panelists this morning for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom and your ideas. I want to remind you on the back of your program this morning, you'll find links to all the studies, there are thousands of pages of studies here that you can link to, but there are also websites on here that allow you to keep on top of what's going on and how to be involved, including the Minnesota Children's Cabinet website. So you can stay in touch with everything that's going on. Please stay involved. This is a very important issue for all of us. Tom Menzel and Legacy Financial Advisors, thank you again for sponsoring our event this morning. Our next small talk is Tuesday, June 5th, here at Wilder Center. We'll be looking at the Legislative Auditor's Report on Early Childhood Programs in Minnesota. Jody Howard from the Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor will provide an overview of the report, and our panelists that morning will be Senator Melissa Wickland, Representative Jennifer Loon, Erica Moss from Close Gaps by 5, and Kelly Munson and Diane Halsey will be with us again. So we hope you'll be able to join us in June for that. And then a final reminder, this week, March 29th, is Advocacy for Children's Day at the State Capitol at 9:30. Be there. Thank you, everybody, for being here.